represent the Tennessee division of the SCB here today, and I was thinking about thoughts that I would share with y'all today and about our ancestors. And if you know me, I'm not one to plan a speech weeks and weeks ahead of time. It's usually a couple of days before as the thoughts come together. So this morning, I went to bed last night with some ideas, and about 7 o'clock this morning, before getting ready up here, the words began to come. So I'm going to tell you a little story today about a group of men that is near and dear to each one of us here. A group that seems immortal. A group that will live forever if we do our part to keep their memory alive. Brave Confederate soldiers. As you've heard just a few minutes ago, this charge has been given to us. Our history has been under attack since the end of the war, not just in recent times. Yankee scoundrels have tried to pervert and destroy it for generations, yet somehow our story lives on. Thank God for the ones that have carried the banner and have kept their story alive. Just as this beautiful monument that stands here behind us today, there are thousands more of these across the land. Courthouse lawns to small family cemeteries, street corners, names on buildings, and more still being added today. Why, you may ask? Because we will not let their sacrifice be forgotten. We will etch their names and stories in stone that will long outlast paper. The protractors want to chisel these away, and at times may be successful. But there is one place that they cannot remove their memory. It's from our hearts and in our minds. I'm grateful to be raised in a family that has talked about our heritage. My grandparents were not ashamed to be grandchildren of the sons of great men of great. They talked about them many, many times sitting in grandparents' home. They mentioned that their grandfather and grandmother helped fight. And we're going to talk about why I say grandmother. Everyone wants to be remembered. We all want to be remembered for something. The veterans themselves wanted this. General Lee tells us in the charge that he gave to us in Louisiana in 1906 to keep their story alive. We heard that today. But it was not only him. I'm best at telling you about the local veterans that I know. One of those is our local Humboldt, Tennessee veteran, Nelson Alexander Crescent. He wanted to instill the cause for which he fought in the hearts and the minds of his grandchildren. For many years, every April, he would take a train with his grandchildren from Humboldt to Shiloh. He would spend a full day with them, maybe even more, telling them of where this comrade fell or this one was wounded. He would talk of the Bloody Pond. He would talk about where General Johnston was killed. His granddaughter, 25 years ago, shared many of these stories as she went with her grandfather to the battlefield. She says he would cry as he told about his comrades that fell in the days of old and the sacrifices he did not want to be forgotten. He was a true Southern gentleman of old stock. He cared for his family and his desire to make his community a better place. Almost 90 years ago he left us, and his memory lives on. Why, you may ask? Because someone continued to tell his story. Now, I could go on for hours and hours and talk about some of these brave men that I've come to learn of and know about. But it's more than just reading words or hearing stories. It's personal for me. Though I didn't live through those times, didn't get to know these men personally, but they are my blood. They are my family. They are a part of me, and I am a part of them. I'm reminded of uncles and aunts and cousins that were basically tortured in our area of West Tennessee and throughout the South. One story, Reverend John Washington Jones, a distant cousin of mine, who was known by most as Uncle Jack. He was a circuit-riding Methodist minister. He farmed for a living. And in the early 60s, he tried to remain neutral along with his son at the early days of the war. But on one late fall evening, a group of pilfering Yankees come to his farm looking to steal anything of value. Well, Uncle Jack had already hidden and buried away much of his treasure and his valuables, so when these guys showed up, they wouldn't find anything or take much. They did take his pocket watch. But during the night, he heard the ruckus downstairs, went out to meet these Yankees that were in his yard. They pull him on out of the house. They string him up in the tree in the front yard by his thumbs. Can you imagine the pain and suffering of being held by your thumbs? At 270 pounds, that'd be rough for me and many of us here today. Well, he never gave in. We learned his hands were ruined. He was unable to farm. In just a short while, his son Willie joined the Confederate Army. It was asked of him why he joined. He simply said, because they hung my father. Willie didn't survive the war. In just a few months, he was homesick and buried in the small church cemetery where his father pastored. Uncle Jack would continue to preach the gospel throughout the war. Many stories and diaries tell of how hard it was for him to be behind enemy lines and preach the gospel. How they destroyed our churches. His story lives on because his children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren still tell his story today. Another reason personally is my Uncle Solomon Shaw was shot and killed by Yankees in September of 1862. These same murderers came to steal from him and his property, things he had worked for his entire life to have. A long story short, they scuffled, and on the porch of his house, he was shot by a Yankee soldier. Falls over dead. His son, wounded in the head, does survive. But the heroic daughter, Cindy, and I get this image of her with her pistols on her side, as the story tells, that she takes a shot. She hits one of those soldiers and kills him. Like Cindy, there were women of the time that were not afraid to pick up arms as well and defend their homes. You know, there's never going to be another generation like those in the 1860s. Families torn apart, financially broken, homes and businesses burned and destroyed, husbands and sons dead or wounded. Our ancestors struggled in a mighty, terribly way, my friends. The years after the war and Reconstruction, just as horrible, if not worse, to some. But these men did come home. They did rebuild. They built up their communities. They rebuilt their homes and lives. However, the olden days are never forgotten. The women knew that their sacrifice had to be remembered. They knew their story would try to be wiped away. These ladies built lasting memorials of stones to tell this story. And I thank God for those today. They had the foresight years ahead to see the things that would come, that this needed to be recorded. Now today, those men and women are all gone, but they sacrificed so much for us. Let us do something for them. I choose to continue to tell their story. Now in closing, I'll tell you one more story. My great-great-uncle, James Bledsoe, enlisted in the 12th Tennessee Infantry in Trenton, Tennessee. He died during the war and was buried in Athens, Alabama. Now somehow a small strip of paper made it home and was placed in the family Bible and told of his death. It has small stains on it, small droplets. And I began to think about that this morning, and I said, I've never really thought about it like this. What were those droplets that were on that paper? I believe it was the tears of his mother as they learned of his death. So what are these monuments? They're the gravestones to men like James Bledsoe, who never got to be brought home. Yet today he has a modern stone, and I got to visit that just a few years ago. And to think that his parents or siblings probably never got to visit his grave. All they had was that small strip of paper they kept in the family Bible. The only piece of paper that's loose in the family Bible. As I close today, the epitaph of Captain James Monroe Collinsworth of Company I, the 6th Tennessee, listed in Madison County in 1861, passed away in 1861, the fall, around September. And his epitaph on his stone simply reads, "My God, my wife, my children, and my country." Captain Robert Louis Dabney says it best when he says, "Sir, you have no reason to be ashamed of your Confederate dead. See, they have no reason to be ashamed of you. God bless the South. God bless Dixie. God bless these men that sacrificed, and we're able here today to honor them. Thank you.